All right, I think that we can get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Craig Willingham. I'm the Managing Director for the CUNY Urban Food Policy Institute. For those of you who are new to the Institute, we are a research and action center based at the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. And our work focuses on a wide variety of food policy related topic areas, everything from jobs in the food sector to the connections between upstate agricultural producers and downstate consumers. We do a fair amount of work looking at food insecurity issues and issues related to food access in the built environment. And we also are beginning to do a lot of work looking at the nexus of food and climate change, which is something that has been on many of our minds and is a topic that is increasingly being addressed with a sense of urgency and a sense of purpose that is warranted for the challenges that we face ahead in the coming decades in terms of the climate changes that we're likely to see. With that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about today's forum. This forum focuses on how cities can use food as lever to address climate change and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. We really want to explore where cities can change things like institutional food procurement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. What are the sorts of challenges? What are the opportunities? And what are the sorts of things that are being done currently? What are the barriers? How do we use our ability to come up with systems and track various successes to understand what we need to do to plan even more adequately for the future? And what are the sorts of things that are happening in terms of certifications, pledges, and other sorts of mechanisms that cities are participating in order to take the initial steps to address climate change with a focus on food? And when we talk about climate change, climate, much like food, can be a proxy for so many different things, for jobs, for health, for the environment. And I think that there is a really good synergy between issues related to food and food policy and climate policy. So, it makes this sort of discussion, I think, very relevant and also, very sort of engaging in a way that talking about the two issues in an isolated way doesn't necessarily produce. And with that in mind, I want to introduce today's speakers. We have Joe F. Bozeman III, Assistant Professor of Environmental Engineering at Georgia Institute of Technology; Kizzy Charles Guzman, Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice; Edwina Hughes, Head of Cool Food from the World Resources Institute; Julia Jordan, Senior Director of Sustainability at Compass USA; and last but not least, Kate McKenzie, Executive Director for the Mayor's Office of Food Policy. Before we jump into today's presentation and discussion, I want to mention one more thing. We have an upcoming forum happening in May. Most of you are probably familiar with our forums if you're here, and if you're new, hopefully you'll see our forums as a resource for information or sharing ideas, etc., and you'll continue to attend. Our forum in May will be focused on predatory marketing, with a theme being denormalizing predatory marketing of unhealthy food. What are strategies and tactics that we can employ now and in the future? And we're currently fleshing out the guest speakers for that forum. We'll be sending out a notice very soon with the details about who will be a part of it. But suffice to say, we think it'll be a very engaging and instructive forum. So we hope that you can make it. And again, that's going to be May 31st at 9:30 a.m. All right. That said, I'm going to jump right into it and turn things over to Edwina from Cool Food to talk about her work and some of the things that they've been engaged in around food and climate change. So Edwina, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Craig, and lovely to be with all of you today. So I'm really pleased to be here. I have a presentation of roughly 10 minutes, so I'm just going to jump right in and tell you about the Cool Food movement. I suppose the first thing to mention is just that we talk about delicious climate action because we're really keen to make this climate commitment really appealing and engaging for people. So it's easy and it's possible to eat in a sustainable way that's also delicious. Next slide, please. So in terms of just setting the scene, I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to talk to you about the World Resources Institute's position on food and climate change. And just to give you some information, that'll probably be quite familiar to a number of you. But we now know that food and agriculture accounts for about a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. And we also know from our research and many other people's research too, I should say, that we're going to have a significant challenge by 2050 when we have about 10 billion people on the planet. We need to think about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, growing enough food to feed all those people on the land that we've got, and also creating enough food on that land to feed everyone. So a land gap, a food gap, and a greenhouse gas emissions reduction gap. Next slide, please. In terms of shifting diets and thinking about how it sits within the solutions to create a sustainable food future, our World Resources report has suggested that there are a range of things we need to think about as we seek to drive down the climate impact of food. And this waterfall diagram, I find it really engaging, but it is kind of complicated. So I'm just going to take a minute to explain it a bit. So we've got a large yellow bar on the left-hand side, and that's 15 gigatons of CO2, where we think the food system is going to be if we continue business as usual. And on the right-hand side, what we have is the smaller yellow bar, which is where we need to get to stay below 2 degrees. And then you see the yellow hatched bar beside it, which is to get down to net zero. So all of the things in between those two yellow bars, the changes we need to see in order to hit that sustainable food future. And I think what we would accept is that a lot of the production improvements have already happened, but what we really need to see is changes in consumption. And that's what the red bars are on the left-hand side. And that's where reducing food loss and waste turns up, but it's also where shifting diets or sustainable diets turns up. And it won't escape you that that's quite a significant solution to this whole picture. In fact, without shifting diets, we're not going to hit that target of reducing the emissions from the food system from 15 gigatons down to 4. So we need to shift diets in order to achieve what we want to do by 2050. On the next slide then, I just wanted to highlight that once we know that shifting diets is significant to creating a sustainable food future, what should we do? Well, we should look at different food types and think about whether they have different climate impacts, and they do, significantly different actually. And this shows you per gram of protein, the climate impact of different foods. And this again is drawn from our environmental science research at the World Resources Institute. And so what it shows you is that actually something like beef, lamb or goat is significantly more climate impactful than something like vegetables, pulses or grains. So what we want to do through Cool Food is to drive consumption away from the climate impactful foods and towards the climate friendly foods. So fewer of the reds and more of the yellows and the greens. Next slide, please. So in terms of what the Cool Food movement is about, the Cool Food Pledge is an international movement underpinned by the latest climate and behavioural science that helps food providers to cut their food-related greenhouse gas emissions while serving delicious food. And the organisations you see listed at the bottom of this slide are our founding partners, a particular mention to Healthcare Without Harm, who are a brilliant partner of ours in the US and have helped us to work with a number of healthcare and hospitals in America. Next slide, please. So in terms of how it works, the Cool Food Pledge is divided between 3 Ps. The pledge, which is the commitment to the science-based target, the plan, which is the use of behavioural science in order to nudge consumers to those more climate-friendly foods, and then the promotion of success, so sharing the progress of the cohort on an annual basis. So I'm just going to speak briefly to each of those 3. So next slide, you see the pledge plays out through procurement data. 2 pie charts on this slide. On the left-hand side, you see the volume of food procured. On the right-hand side, you see the climate impact of that food. So this is the kind of chart that we will give our members in terms of showing them what their climate footprint looks like. And so what we see on the left-hand side is that ruminant meat accounts for about 3% of the volume of food procured. But on the right-hand side, we see that it accounts for 46% of the climate footprint of food. So what we're seeing is a really disproportionate impact of that small volume of food having a massive account for a massive part of that right-hand pie chart. So what we want to do is we want to track and measure the climate impact of the food being served by our member organisations. We want to reduce the size of the right-hand side pie chart, and we also want to drive down the consumption of the climate impactful food, so changing the procurement of the organisation on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to do was just to give you a sense of what those kind of charts would look like and to show you what a member might expect to see. So next slide. I wanted to share with you just the kinds of trends that we can track by using the procurement data of a member organisation. So this organisation submitted data to us in 2016 to 2020. And so you see a big dip in the bar for 2020, that's the pandemic. So the amount of food being procured by the cohort fell by 40% in 2020. So all of our members have this kind of up, and then down, generally speaking. So we see that from this chart that actually total food procurement fell by 11% from 2015 to 2020. On the next slide, then we see what the emissions look like. And so we see that there's actually been a fall of 26%, 2015 to 2020, in absolute emissions. That's the pandemic effect. So actually, when you serve less food, there are fewer emissions associated with the food you serve because the actual volume has dropped so significantly. So in this case, the emissions per calorie is a better measure of success. We see for this organisation, the emissions per calorie or per plate per 1,000 calories has fallen 17%, very encouraging. So despite all of the challenges of the pandemic, we see that this organisation is driving down their climate impact significantly. Next slide, please. And in terms of just benchmarking that organisation then against the cohort, we look and see where it falls. It falls well above the European diet. I wish I had the American diet here, I'm afraid I don't. A little bit below the group average and significantly below restaurants. So what does this suggest? Well, this suggests that we were checking against European, so it's a European organisation. We see that it's significantly higher than the European diet, so there's still a lot of work that they could be doing. And so we'll advise them through behavioural science how to do that. So on the next slide then, you've got the plan, and this is where the behavioural science kicks in. So we've got the pledge, we've got the data, procurement data, we've figured out what the climate footprint looks like. Now we want to change what that footprint, the size of the footprint, so we're using the behavioural science in order to do that. And we use our playbook for guiding diners towards plant-rich dishes and food service to guide our members towards serving more climate-friendly plates. And this isn't just about vegetarian and vegan options, this is about rebalancing plates and thinking about the ratio of meat on a plate. And this playbook has been, a consultative piece of research. It used a literature review reviewing over 4,000 papers. We also combined that with expert interviews with people in the food industry so that we would understand what they think about the feasibility of some of the changes we were suggesting. And so in this playbook, then we have 23 best bet interventions for food organisations to serve more climate-friendly food. We use this as the foundation to advise our members to drive down the climate impact of food. On the next slide then, just to briefly touch on promote. So we promote the cohort's progress on an annual basis. So we add together everyone's progress and then we report out on that. We give you as a member yourself your private report on your progress. That's for your eyes only. If you're doing really well, you want to talk about it, we're going to help you do that. If you've had a bit of an off year, we get that. This is a long game. But just to say, we are seeing great progress for all of our members. And that's the point, the idea is that it's a target with support. So it's not just here's a target, off you go, good luck. It's a target with the behavioural science to help you hit it. In terms of just the cut through with the mainstream media, we've got quite a lot of success. These are the publications that featured our climate messaging work that we published in January. So just to say that our messages are compelling and engaging, and we're able to really capture the imagination of people who may not know a lot about the climate impact of food normally. On the next slide then, I just wanted to show you who's in membership. So this is the broad church of organisations involved. Universities, hospitals and healthcare, cities, of course, the focus of today. So New York, we've got Kate speaking on this as well after me, but just to say we've also got Toronto, Ghent, Copenhagen and Milan in membership. On the next slide then, just to tell you about our progress to date, absolute emissions have fallen by 20%. As I said, not a great measure of success given the pandemic, but emissions per calorie, 16% drop, great news. And on the next slide, how do we hit that? It only took a 1% reduction in the procurement of ruminant meat. So that's just a very positive story and message to relay, that it doesn't have to be a huge lift in order to make this kind of progress. Next slide, I just wanted to touch on some of the questions that I felt you might all have about cities getting involved in an initiative like this. So 4 questions, and I'll briefly just address each of them. So on the next slide, how do cities get involved? Well, you can share this deck with your peers and stakeholders. You can invite me and Alfred and Gerard to come and present to your peers if you want to know more about this. Connect with member cities, ask Kate what she thinks. I think she'll be telling you what she thinks today. But you know, some of the other cities as well. Think about the scope of your involvement. How big do you want to do this? Get sign off from mayor, deputy mayor, and join. That's simple as that. On the next slide then, the requirements. We need a good faith commitment towards that 25% reduction. We need a signed agreement for a year's involvement. You could drop out after a year. We hope you don't. We haven't had any attrition so far, touch wood. We give you access to webinars, data and environmental behavioural science, and you become a member of a global movement, and there's no fee for cities involvement in the Cool Food Pledge. On the next slide then, here are the obstacles you might get. Well, is it a financial barrier? No, no financial barrier. Challenging data collection? We hope not. We've got simple templates that you can fill in. Making it relevant, we have compelling communications and resources for you to use in order to share this story with your stakeholders. And then the final question was around the benefits of membership. We see this on the next slide, that it tracks significant scope 3 emissions for you. It's a really reputable third-party accreditation of the data capture and then the reporting. It will give you content for your submissions to CDP and good food purchasing. It provides a compelling story, and it is robust and transparent. So then on my final slide, just in terms of how you might get involved. If you would like to join the Cool Food community, please do send me an email. This is my email address. If you want more information, check out coolfood.org. And if you want to check out a little cheeky campaign we launched on Earth Day, it's at igiveafork.org. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Edwina. Very interesting. And I think that, understanding both the effort and the complexity of tracking changes to the way in which we procure food in terms of climate change is something that, to a large degree, we're at the very beginning of in a sort of concerted way. And I think it's interesting to see the effort that your organization is taking and the ways in which cities are trying to amplify the sort of work that they're doing. So thank you for sharing that. Next up, we have Kizzy Charles Guzman, Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. Kizzy?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for having me. Again, I'm Kizzy Charles Guzman from the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, and I'm thrilled to join you for this conversation. I feel like I learn so much every time I hear it when I go through this presentation. When Mayor Adams announced the creation of my new office in January, he acknowledged the importance of an intersectional approach to climate leadership, right? He really wanted us centered on a commitment to public health and to environmental justice. So our team is taking an integrated approach to this global challenge, right, of sustainability and adaptation and environmental remediation here in New York City. I'm excited to be leading this team in this renewed focus as I've spent the last 15 years or so of city government service, developing and delivering work that is really at that intersection between racial equity and public health and climate policy. Our mayor's personal experiences also inform our priorities, of course. And as an administration, we're now striving to lead the nation on food policy that carefully considers this interconnectedness between food, health, and climate change. And we're clearly dealing with a very daunting challenge. As you just heard, as a result of climate change, we will see disruptions in the global food supply. We're expecting that floods, droughts, and pests will damage crops, and we will see ocean fisheries collapse from acidification and oxygen depletion and other environmental hazards like severe plastic pollution, right, which is traveling up our food chain. Environmental degradation will also cause catastrophic and unpredictable ripple effects, including mass migrations, particularly of communities that are dependent on agricultural or coastal livelihoods, and impacts on our economy, our health, and of course, the nutritiousness of our food supply. Locally, we have more than 8 million people here in New York City and over 500,000 food sector employees and 40,000 food businesses. The city is also a major producer, processor, and manufacturer of food, from urban farms to bakeries to small-scale manufacturing. 19 billion pounds of food enters the city annually, yet nearly 1.6 million residents are food insecure, which is a staggering number. Locally, we know that rising sea levels and other extreme weather will threaten our city's essential food infrastructure, including the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center and other waterfront distribution sites. We're worried about that. We're also worried about the ways that our local and global food system contributes to climate change, as we have heard this morning, but also the ways that it contributes to ecosystem degradation. So, for example, food scraps make up as much as 20% of all household and commercial waste. Much of it is edible, and they contribute most of the methane that is released from landfills. Our very own New York State Department of Environmental Conservation estimates that if these food scraps were diverted from landfills, we would see a reduction of over 120,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. And that's aside from the pollution that results from transporting and refrigerating food, which in New York City disproportionately impacts low-income communities of color. Lastly, the IPCC tells us that nationally, up to 14% of our total greenhouse gas emissions from food come from processes within the farm gate, especially as we raise animals for dairy and protein. And up to 14% comes from land use change, including deforestation. In total, the IPCC is estimating that between 21 and 37% of US greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to the food system. So all that to say that without forward planning, climate change will significantly disrupt the city's food supply, and without a shift to more climate-friendly food, we will in turn also contribute further to the climate crisis. Fortunately, we're not starting from scratch. New York City has been building a growing arsenal of policies that are designed to protect our infrastructure from climate risk while reducing our food system's negative impacts on our planet. Last year, the city released our first ever 10-year food plan to ensure that we're doing our part locally to have a sustainable, resilient, and healthy food system. The plan is centered on 5 goals that ensure that all New Yorkers have multiple ways to access healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. That the city's food economy drives economic opportunity and provides good jobs, which is critically important to Mayor Adams as well. That the supply chains that feed New York City are modern, efficient, and resilient. That our food is produced, distributed, and disposed of sustainably, and that we support local systems and knowledge to implement the goals of this plan. Today, I am joined by the amazing and tireless Kate McKenzie, the city's director for the Mayor's Office of Food Policy, and you'll hear from Kate next, and we'll both share just a few of the tools in our arsenal. But the couple that I want to touch on really briefly as priority areas where we can and will have a major impact include: 1, obviously harnessing more from our purchasing power and making critical investments. Our city spends over $500 million annually for food. In February, Mayor Adams signed 2 executive orders to formalize the city's commitment to good food purchasing and to promote healthy food advertising on city property. I am excited that under Mayor Adams, city agency food standards were revised to evaluate our performance based on values of nutrition, support for local economies, environmental sustainability, and animal welfare, including new initiatives to minimize the consumption of processed foods and sugary drinks while encouraging whole and plant-based food options. Also last year, as you've heard, New York City became the first city in the nation to join the WRI's Cool Food Pledge, which we are focused on today and which Kate will describe in more detail soon. But again, through this pledge, we're committing to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions associated by the food we serve by 25% by 2030, which again is the level of ambition that's in line with achieving the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Also, this week we announced $140 million worth of an investment in the Hunts Point market, just again recognizing the vital role that it plays in the food supply chain that employs thousands of New Yorkers and that supplies 25% of the city's fresh produce. We know that a resilient food system is central to the city's future. The last tool I want to share with you is harnessing more from our partners in health. As you know, Mayor Adams has a long-standing commitment to a healthy lifestyle, and he really cares about not feeding the healthcare crisis, as he loves to say. One way that he's focused on making a difference is by expanding plant-based lifestyle medicine clinics in 6 city-run hospitals. These facilities provide holistic care for New Yorkers with chronic health issues. So at Bellevue Hospital, for example, we already have launched a plant-based lifestyle medicine program where dietitians and health coaches are working to help patients transition to a plant-based diet and provide advice to adopt healthier food choices. Again, just institutional foods provide a clear opportunity to introduce just how important and delicious climate-friendly foods can be to both our health and our planet. So I think we're already demonstrating our determination to fight for food justice and ensure a livable climate, but there is just so much more to be done. We're facing many challenges that require a new level of ambition, and I'm thrilled to be able to work with Kate to execute on this, especially as we try to provide adequate nutrition and food security for a growing population in the face of a climate crisis. Our mayor, this administration is committed to a just transition to carbon neutrality, climate resiliency, and a clean economy. And we are committed to improving environmental quality and health today, prioritizing frontline communities and populations, and creating economic opportunities for all as we plan for tomorrow. Food touches on all of those elements of a just transition, and the conversation we're having today and your work and the audience members in this space are crucial to ensure that we get there. So thank you again for having me, and Kate, I'll now hand it off to you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kizzy. It is, can you all hear me? Oh, awesome. Okay. Kizzy, thank you. It is, I'm going to build on your enthusiasm. Also, Edwina, it's such a pleasure to hear from you. And I just love so many of the graphics that WRI has produced to be able to visualize what can be pretty complicated to digest. So thanks again to CUNY and to the food policy team for pulling together such timely conversations that are driven in action and aspiration, particularly for the students who are listening as well. Go ahead, Rositza. So just, I believe most of you know this, but you know, this office, much like Kizzy's office, which again, it is just, it feels so good to be able to talk hand in hand with a sister office about food policy and our shared goals. But we are codified as of February 2020. And certainly with Mayor Adams, we have never been more eager and committed to a broad suite of food policy tools to achieve our shared successes. You know, Kizzy mentioned Mayor Adams brings together his personal experiences in the space of combating diet-related diseases through lifestyle medicine, his personal convictions around justice and equity, specifically around also the place of food. You heard perhaps earlier in the week at the State of the City, it wasn't a speech where people came away saying, "Where's food? I don't understand that," which has been the norm for several years. This mayor made food pronounced in all pillars of the priorities that he underscored during that really momentous occasion. This team is here to see all of those aspirations come to life. And I'm going to talk you through a little bit about some of the things that we've done to date, but also really drill in specifically on this newer area for us, which is the intersection around climate and sustainability and food, which we've been able to talk about in the past, but now I can show you some concrete action. So Kizzy mentioned this, but it's momentous. The executive orders that were signed in February, and Craig, again, appreciate you your presence at that signing. I'm calling that out, not just because, within the first, 60 days or so, we signed 2 executive orders on food, but because the first executive order formalized our commitments to good food purchasing. Now, many of you have heard me and others talk about good food purchasing for a while, and how the city is making progress on that framework, but it formalized our commitment. And that is very important because it gives us a sense of accountability from the mayor down through the deputy mayors, through all city agencies. And this office is responsible for holding agencies accountable to that system. Again, I will say that the other executive order really made sure that we're promoting food and healthy food. It gives us opportunities to, again, draw these connections visually to healthy food, particularly climate friendly options. Now, the food standards that were also just issued, reissued and relaunched, really, again, our sense of accountability, not just to the Cool Food Pledge, but to the Glasgow Declaration that we recently became a signatory to as well, furthering our commitments around the intersections of systems change around climate and food. So the reason why I'm pulling up good food purchasing here is because our work and our decisions to join the Cool Food Pledge were anchored around our ability to see action, particularly on the environmental sustainability element and value of good food purchasing. If you're not familiar, nyc.gov/GFP articulates our citywide strategy towards good food purchasing, shows all of the agencies' assessments to date, but also their action plans to advance. But as we are really drilling into good food purchasing, we're trying to figure out the sweet balance between working within a legal framework for how agencies can see change, and also wanting people to be able to have something that they can get excited about. And so when we became aware of the Cool Food Pledge and the sort of, to quote Mayor Adams here, the radical practicality of using existing data for an ability to be able to drill into what our carbon related emissions from food might be, it was quite clear. So as you know, we've been capturing, every agency makes its best efforts to capture the source location and all many details around the food purchases that we make, so that we have areas to improve. Go ahead. So this is a preview for you all about what we will be releasing in the coming days. Will be located on our website. But we wanted, stakeholders such as you and others to be able to see, not just look at the numbers and read our strategies, but to be able to visualize what it is that we are buying, and then also what the carbon equivalents to that look like. So, this is really important for us because we want people to be able to understand how to make and choose climate friendly options. Certainly as a city, as an entire city, we are looking to do that, and we want to empower individuals with the same information to be able to do so. So for instance, this is not dynamic right now. I just wanted to show it to you, but I'll see if I can pull it up on my end here. So for instance, if we, you'll see here, we've got fiscal 19 data available up in this fiscal year field. And by the fall, we should have fiscal years 2020 and 2021. And then we have different agencies. So there'll be a drop down here, and you can look at the city as a whole, which is what's the view in front of you, or you can look at the various agencies from the Department of Education to Department of Corrections, Administration for Children's Services, and many more. But you'll be able to also hover above and see, for example, in the dairy category, which is comprises by weight the largest purchases of what we purchase, you'll see the top 5 items that we purchase. So spoiler alert, the first thing here is low-fat milk. And then in the fruits and vegetables category, you'll see that the largest New York Pride here, the largest item that we purchase is apples, followed by orange juice. In grains, there's a lot of all of these, of course, meet our food standards, the cereals. In roots and tubers, you'll see here again, because it's important when WRI crunched these numbers to be able to discern between roots and tubers versus fruits and vegetables. So here you'll see some of the potatoes, the carrots, etc., the specific type of chicken that we're purchasing. Remarkably, I will note here that the small by weight, visual here around the ruminant meats, those that Edwina noted were the largest contributors to carbon, specifically beef and lamb. We have, and many of you also know, we've been working for several years to reduce that, but with great pride, we're showing a relatively small purchase of that as it stands right now. In legumes and beans, we're buying dried pigeon beans, dried Great Northern beans, and then it goes on and on to some of these smaller categories of plant-based milk substitutes. And these, again, just a great sort of shout out to WRI. What we do with the typology of foods that we were working with the Center for Good Food Purchasing needed to be realigned to be able to drill in to this level of detail. But as you can see, it really just shows a lot more, gives a lot more color and dynamic nature to understanding what it is that we're buying. And so the next slide then is, this is another just screenshot of that. You'll be able to see, because it is, and this is something that we need to grapple with WRI. And if you've heard me mention this before, I'm going to say it again. Our data is constantly improving. That we do not have ready, we have to go through, contact all of the vendors. The vendors then have to, really determine, where a particular food was grown, where was it processed, where was it manufactured, where was it distributed, and all of these elements, vendors are not yet in a pattern of having to do that on a regular basis. Now, moving forward, every city contract will require that, but we've got some ways to go. For example, this data that I'm presenting to you here shows about 75% data completion, but a smaller fraction, a much smaller fraction of that is actually complete. So they might know, a vendor might know, for example, several layers of the source of that food, but some are still empty. So we haven't had an accountability metric to be able to require this until now. But again, over time, as more and more data gets analyzed, that's going to impact our sort of baselines and year-over-year changes. So just wanted to acknowledge that. But then in the next slide, and this is really the fun part here, is that you'll also be able to see, thanks to the analysis and work from WRI through our signatory status with Cool Food Pledge, we've been able to see the equivalence of those food purchases broken down by their emissions results. Now, I have to tell you something, that when we got this data in, Edwina's colleague, Rich, said like, geez, I'm not sure, guys. I think maybe you double counted on, like, could you shared like double the amount of dairy that you sent in? And I scratched my head for a minute and then realized some of you might be putting this together already. As you know, we're the first US city to participate in the Cool Food Pledge. And so as a US city that is home also to the largest school district in the country, we have a requirement with all school meals that milk must be provided. So our and our dairy values here are quite large, and also we'll go into thinking about what's possible for reduction strategies, right? Because dairy of all forms is something that will be continue to be a part of school meals. And so we're going to be able to have to look at, again, those ruminant meats or other areas to be able to make some quantifiable changes where possible in the carbon categories here. So again, these are, you'll be able to see, this is again for the city as a whole, not necessarily broken out by agencies, but 43% of our food-related emissions are coming from dairy. Conversely, and because as you now know from the data that Edwina shared with you, fruits and vegetables at large are much smaller, take much less carbon in their production, and they are about 3.6% of our total. So this is all incredibly useful as a city who, as Kizzy mentioned, we have shared commitments here around evaluating our food purchases through the lens of climate and being mindful of what we're doing to be able to think about reduction strategies. And so, I will just say, again, the next slide is, underscoring too that our food standards that were just issued for meals and snacks served at the beginning of the month also really elevated the role of sustainability in those standards by bringing that front and center. I think it's the first paragraph of the standards. They are not currently a requirement, with other experts and, both nationwide here and globally, we're trying to determine the best ways that we can consider, the requirements around some of these factors. And again, underscoring that working on a legal strategy to be able to do that is important as well. Big shout outs also to, some of you I know on the call, as well as others around the state and in other sort of regional areas who are also looking at the way in which certain types of livestock are produced and trying to reduce, the amount of carbon that it takes to produce those commodities. But also, this is such, as Kizzy mentioned, such a growing body of work. This is I'm quite proud of this effort, but this is our putting our best foot forward right now while acknowledging that this is a new area for the city, and we are really eager to be a part and a player in reducing our food-related emissions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kate and Kizzy, for laying out the mission, vision, and implementation of the work that the city's doing around food and climate change. All very interesting. Next up, I want to invite Julia Jordan, Director of Sustainability for Compass USA, to share her screen. I don't see you yet, Julia. Are you there?
Oh, here I am.
There you go. Great. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. And you can go to the next slide, please. So hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. I just want to talk a little bit at the beginning about our sustainability journey. So this work in the industry and setting sustainability commitments is not new to us. We have been on our sustainability journey since 1995. And we were the first food service company in 2007 to commit to purchasing cage-free eggs. In 2010, we developed our first version of our carbon footprint tool, which I'll talk a little bit more in the later slides. And in 2015, we created Imperfectly Delicious Produce. And that's a program where we partner with our produce suppliers to rescue ugly produce that is perfectly safe to eat, but for cosmetic reasons, it's traditionally thrown out. In 2017, we launched our back of house waste tracking tool, Waste Not, and we also celebrated our first annual Stop Food Waste Day. It's a day of celebration and awareness that focuses on what everyone can do to really minimize food waste. And yesterday was actually the 6th annual Stop Food Waste Day. And then last fall, we announced our science-based targets and net zero commitment. It's important that at Compass, we really leverage our scale and our passion and expertise to target the areas where we believe we can really have the most significant impact on the environment. Our reach means that when we work together with our clients, consumers, and suppliers, we can really take tangible steps to create a sustainable future for all. Next slide, please. Each year, we put out our annual corporate social responsibility report to really celebrate the accomplishments and the amazing work that our operators are doing to make their cafes more sustainable. There's an overview video in the deck that I invite all of you to watch once the presentation is sent out. Next slide, please. Oh, we can pause the video and go to the next slide. Rosita, are you able to go to the next slide? Excellent, thank you. So we believe that food elevates us, it nourishes us, it brings us together, but in its current state, the food system is a leading cause of climate change. And Compass Group at a global level has committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050. So that means we'll be reducing our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 46%, putting us at carbon neutral, and working on reducing our scope 3 emissions by 28% by 2030. And it's important to note that our commitment aligns with the science-based target criteria. Our goals are bold where we have direct impact and reasonable where we're dependent on others. Next slide. So it's really going to take us pulling multiple levers in order to make an impact on our footprint. We'll work to achieve our goals through a variety of ways, such as really focusing on redesigning our menus, promoting a plant-forward way of eating, and combating food waste, and electrifying our fleet. And it's important to note that the really radical change that is needed won't be made without the support of others. So we are going to have to collaboratively work with our partners and our suppliers to ensure that they are making progress on their goals, or if they have yet to make goals, encouraging them to do so. Next slide. So the sustainability roadmap is the US vision for the future and really hones in on the initiatives that we as a company will be focused on over the next few years. Our philosophy is foundationally built around the belief that through better sourcing practices, championing farm worker rights, combating food waste, and promoting supplier diversity, we can lower our carbon impact, strengthen our communities, and create a healthier planet. And I'm going to touch on these 4 pillars of the roadmap in the next few slides. Next slide. So obviously, given our business, our food purchases are a top driver of our footprint. And to combat that, our chefs will need to adjust their menus to reduce those high emitting items such as beef and dairy and take a more plant-forward approach. One of the tools that will help us along that journey is our Replant Your Menu training. It's an online training for chefs that help them navigate the intersection of food and climate change and encourages them to reduce animal protein add more plants to their menus, and of course, lead with flavor first. We believe that you can't manage what you can't measure, and so we developed Carbon Food Print, which is our online application that assists cafes in measuring their carbon, water, and waste. And this tool pulls in food purchases and kitchen equipment data to show a user's cafe footprint. Our managers are then able to create an actionable plan to make reductions. And Carbon Food Print has been extremely beneficial for our clients who have signed on to Cool Food Pledge. Since the cafe is already tracking their emissions of their food, all they have to do is easily download their carbon dashboard from the tool and submit it to WRI. Of course, storytelling is a huge component in encouraging our guests to consider how their food choices impact the planet and to make changes. So we found it's important to make the right choice the easy choice. The climate-friendly option has to sound good, so we really focus on naming the dishes in an appealing way and steering clear of really calling things out as vegan or vegetarian. We also use a flavor-first approach, and it has to be delicious above all else. You know, if it doesn't taste good, the consumer is not going to put climate health above their own personal needs. Compass Group is proud to be the company that really takes the lead on sustainable sourcing practices. So we pride ourselves in the ability to be transparent and report on our progress. We are able to attribute our purchases, and those can be pulled into sustainability scorecards that accounts can pull in real time and really get a sense of how they're tracking. We're also focused on accelerating the growth of women and minority owned businesses through our operations and have developed a supplier program to facilitate that goal. Next slide. Reducing single-use plastics is another area of focus for us. We encourage our clients, of course, to prioritize reusables whenever possible, but with the nature of our business, to-go or single-use items are often necessary. So we're partnering with manufacturers from different avenues, such as reusable options or single-use items that can be composted or recycled to build a comprehensive solution for our clients. Next slide. Compass Group has been at the forefront of food waste reduction since 2015. We're members of the United States Food Loss and Waste 2030 Champions Group and are supporters of the US Food Loss and Waste Action Plan. And our strategy really focuses on prevention, reducing waste at the source, and recovery to divert surplus food. And we've made a commitment to reduce our food waste by 50% by 2030. We've armed our chefs with various tools to help them reduce and prevent waste in their operations. Our back-of-house waste tracking tool, Waste Not 2.0, was designed to really change behavior with real-time tracking and dashboard reporting. And this easy-to-use system really allows chefs to identify the reason behind the wasted food and create an action plan to reduce. In 2016, we created Stop Food Waste Day. As I mentioned earlier, it's a global day of action to drive awareness. And Stop Food Waste Day is celebrated in over 100 countries, with over 100 million participants. And about 20 cities in the US have proclaimed Stop Food Waste Day a day of action. And I have a bit of a shameless plug on the last slide, if you could go to the next slide. So with yesterday being Stop Food Waste Day, I would love it if each of you would follow us on social media. You can use the QR code, or please find us on one of the other platforms. And we've also released a virtual cookbook this year that is on stopfoodwasteday.com and features zero waste recipes from Compass Group chefs around the globe. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Julia. Very interesting, and I look forward to hearing a bit more about what the implementation of many of the things you discuss looks like when we get into the Q&A section. Last but not least, I want to bring Joe up to the virtual stage. Joe?
Well, hello, everyone. I am very excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'll try my best to be as succinct as I can to leave more time for the Q&A. So we're going to dive right into it. I think you'll find this information really interesting. But before I do go into the details of the study, I want to do a bit of contextualization. You've heard some of this today already, but the food system, of course, is arguably one of the largest drivers of global environmental change. And this chart you're looking at now is a good representation of part of the reason why that's happening. As we navigate towards year 2050, we expect to see more people on the planet than ever before, of course, but we also expect to see the largest urbanized population, with North America leading the way. But if you look at the bottom two lines here, the purple and the darkish brown lines representing Asia and Africa, you'll notice that we expect to see increasing urbanization rates from those global regions by themselves. Now, why is this important? Well, we have to think about the fact that not only are we seeing an increased urbanization dynamic, which has very interesting interplay with our rural and peri-urban communities, but we're also seeing a diversifying population, right? Where race and ethnicity are becoming more prominent issues within these urban populations, as well as the socio-political and cultural idiosyncrasies that come with these changing dynamics. I call this confluence of population growth, urbanization, and socio-political dynamics social densification. And what this essentially means is that we're all now dealing with political, infrastructure, and food system challenges that we've never imagined as a society, as a civilization, having to overcome. How do we actually address this in a systematic way, in a cohesive and inclusive way? Well, I propose to you that we'll have to do so by establishing some rules of the road. And one of those overarching rules should be systemic equity. As you see here, they involve several components, the most dynamic ones and most primary ones being distributive, procedural, and recognitional equity. Distributive meaning the exchange of resources and dollars, procedural meaning policies, right? Maybe the mayor's office signing those executive orders are an exemplification of that. And recognitional equity, which is one that gets overlooked too often, I think, is one that I think engineers, transdisciplinary stakeholders, public policymakers, economists need to pay a lot more attention to. And what that is the addressing of cultural norms, just adhering to respect, decency, and understanding what that means based off of whatever subgroup we're talking about. And as a case study, I'm going to present to you a study that looks at the entire United States food consumption, the over 7,000 food commodities we consume. And we look at land, greenhouse gas, and water impacts as the main media here. For the science wonks on this call, you might enjoy the fact that life cycle assessment and statistical analysis of public surveys are the main methodologies used. I won't spend a whole bunch of time on the methods here just to get to the highlight results, but I do want to make sure you're aware that the data you'll see is only for cradle to farm gate activities, meaning that we don't include things like transportation to purchase food, but we do include general activities such as preparation and consumption. And let me explain what that means at a results level. So we've taken this food from several different sources, specifically the USDA. We've done some interesting life cycle assessment application, and now we get, on average, what we think the US person per capita affects when they consume food. We call these food consumption impacts, or FCIs. So to your furthest left, you see that land disruption is roughly 1,700 square meters a year. We have carbon dioxide equivalencies of greenhouse gas emissions, upwards of 650 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And then we also see this water measure at 320,000 liters per year. And these numbers matter, they're important. Of course, all of these media have impact on human health, everything from respiratory issues to potentially COVID, if we think about land disturbance. But I argue that these numbers by themselves are barely meaningful unless we apply them to real life. And what do I mean by that? I posit that breaking these numbers down by major demographic groups give us better insight into how these food consumption impacts are deriving from various communities, despite what some of us may want to see in the United States in particular. The demographic groups of the Black, Latinx, and white subgroups tend to live in separate communities. What does that mean? It means that the laws that we potentially may apply to one community is going to have dynamic impacts. So the real important thing I want to mention here is that we could not represent all the various racial and ethnic subgroups because we could not get statistically significant data. Not happy about that, but that's just the case here. Nonetheless, the Black and Latinx subgroups and the white subgroups were represented, which is over 90% of the US population. If I were in the room with you all, I would ask for a show of hands, which for this first question. So just put it in your mind. If I were to ask you which race and ethnic subgroup do you think affects land the most based off of the food consumption patterns per person, which one would you say? A lot of folks actually guessed this incorrectly. It would be the Black subgroup, which of course brings up some interesting questions, and I'll get to answering those here in a second. But let's move to greenhouse gas emissions for the same question. Compared to the Black, Latinx, and white groups, which one do you think affect greenhouse gas the most per capita? That would be the white subgroup in this case, based off of the median food consumption patterns. Let's move over to water. Which group do you think affects water the most, comparing Black, Latinx, and white subgroups? Many folks begin to guess this one correctly. It would be the white subgroup. Now, if you're like me, you're probably curious on why something like this has emerged. And I go further in just one more graph talking about the comparison between the Black and white subgroups at the US level per capita or per person. Now, this graph is a little dense, but I just want to bring to your attention, we're just comparing the white and Black subgroups here. And the bar graphs that extend above the x-axis here represent the land greenhouse gas and water impact difference compared to their Black counterparts. The bar graphs that extend below are for the Black subgroup that has a comparison more than their white counterparts. So let's look at our white counterparts for the bar graphs that are extending upwards. Why do they affect greenhouse gas and water the most? Well, we see dairy consumption. We also see water intensive vegetable consumption and greenhouse gas intensive vegetable consumption. Let's think about why the Black subgroup may affect land the most. Well, protein foods, land intense protein foods would be the case, and land intense fruit. And there are a myriad of other dynamics and cultural idiosyncrasies that play into this data set. But I'll break it down into two, a really simple comparison, I should say. One is blueberries and apples. Now, blueberries require roughly 7 times more water per kilogram to produce than apples. What does that mean? That means, theoretically speaking, the white subgroup can eat 6 times less blueberries than the Black subgroup eats apples and still affect water more. So these are really important relationships to understand if we're actually going to inform policymakers on how to change behavior. A one-shoe-fits-all approach may be appropriate in some cases, but if we really want to refine our efforts, we're going to have to understand regional, local, and cultural differences. Just for some high-level policy implications, we potentially could be labeling our basic food items with generic information on land, greenhouse gas, and water intensity. That could help shape some behavior, but that only goes part of the way. There are a whole lot of educational and behavioral dynamics that we're going to have to approach. Food stamp program or SNAP program could be one way of approaching it, but we're really just going to have policymakers and a societal receptivity towards these racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic differences and understanding it at a quantitative level. So we can inform our models. So if we do this, and we do this across all of our disciplines, we'll start creating criteria that one day can meet systemic equity. But if we're just saying equity without data and without behavioral changes, we're really not going to be able to meet it, and we'll just be hopeful. That being said, I really appreciate your time. Hopefully I didn't go over on my 10 minutes. Here's some of my personal website and Twitter information, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. I wanted to let the audience know that as we go into this first section of the Q&A, I'm going to provide some questions to the panelists, but please feel free to add your questions into the chat and we'll try our best to get to them. I see a few of you have already submitted some questions and we look forward to getting more. So let us jump right into it. And I want to start with you, Edwina, but I'd like for some of the other panelists to respond to this question as well. There are a variety of different pledges, agreements, guidelines, and certification schemes out there. Cool Food Pledge is one of them, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, etc. All of these are focused on growing sustainable diets in one form or another. But the task of making this happen is immense. That said, what do you think are some of the more obvious shared agenda items across the various initiatives that can help build a unified strategy and create a real momentum around the issue of food and climate change?
Thanks, Craig. I suppose from my point of view, I think the important thing is that we're all informed by the same science. So I think that there's a growing understanding coalescing around these concepts. And with that comes a better chance for everyone to drive the same sorts of behaviors. So I think that's probably how we can help to ensure that we're all moving in the same direction. Certainly, I've been working in corporate responsibility, as it was known, for a number of years. And I think at some points it was like, just set your targets, organizations just set your targets and fingers crossed you make it number one. And also you call the shots in terms of what that target is. Neither of those two things hold true anymore. We have the science-based targets that Julia was talking about. We have third-party accreditation, and we have this amazing wealth of insight that's showing us what's required in order to make a big enough difference so that we can actually create a sustainable food future. And it's a dynamic picture. I think we'd be naive to say that it's one and done. The situation seems to be getting even more intense around the climate emergency. And so the progress that's required may actually need to be even more aggressive or more progressive than we are saying right now. So not to be a harbinger of doom, but I think know the science, accept that it's dynamic, and follow it. I think then if we do those things, we'll all be moving in the same direction.
Thank you. And Kate, I'm wondering what you think. You're at the intersection between so many different discussions about food in the city. Do you see a sort of set of shared agenda items or shared strategy elements that you think could work for unifying all of these different efforts to address climate change through food?
I do. And I think, again, I'll go back to our food standards, which, just so people understand the process of that. And this was a very sort of lengthy period of time because of COVID, but the colleagues at the health department spend years updating, reviewing the evidence that Edwina described, right, to determine how has the science evolved, because it does, it's not static. And then also, what's really important for us here also, in the space of recognizing the food insecurity, the culture, the preferences that the city demands and is entitled to, making sure that whatever changes we're considering, a feasibility check with the agencies who then ultimately administer meals to make sure that, yes, some changes are needed, but that we do that not in an overnight fashion, but more, gradual and sequential. And so I think that, fortunately, we're all I believe everyone is in alignment on the need to put, more plants at the middle of the plate, less meat. And that's not really debatable. And what's nice is that, or, the portion sizes are being examined. And again, what's nice is just having the opportunity to, have my, dear friend Kizzy be able to say that from a climate perspective, and, being able to know that that's also valued from a health perspective as well. And, Craig, I think the real value here in looking at all of the SDGs, Eat Lancet, Cool Food, and many more, is that it's not just looking at things from one vantage point. It's again trying to do the holistic sense of the food system and acknowledging everything through recommendations, which is not easy, but and it's just important to keep moving in that direction.
Any other panelists want to remark on that question?
I'll just add real quickly that, for those that are watching, just a real simple takeaway is things that tend to help human health also tends to help the environment, plant-based foods. So the Eat Lancet dietary recommendation, which is a global recommendation, is a really nice framework that the entire community, geopolitically, the UN and the like, could get behind and begin adapting so that we can meet those recommendations and potentially address global climate change.
Great, thank you. And just a sort of technical comment, Rosita, if you could re-up some of the questions from the chat. For some reason, they've disappeared from my chat interface. Just the last couple that came in, I can see, but I know there were some earlier ones that I wanted to bring up. So if you have a moment, if you could resend those to me. Kizzy, I want to direct this question towards you. There are a number of critiques voiced by opponents of what some consider the more aggressive efforts to address climate change. Critiques like increased cost of goods and services, more burdensome regulation, and a diminished standard of living. What do you think is the best way to address these critiques and to make the strongest possible case for food-focused climate change?
Sure. Thank you for that question. Look, let me just say that ultimately, our goal is not in any way to restrict choice and to tell people what to eat and when to eat and how to eat it. We want to ensure that New Yorkers have exposure and access to healthy, plant-based, climate-friendly foods. So we are actually about promoting more options and more access, not taking that away. So I think part of it is really centering on the fact that we are ultimately in a huge moment, right? We have to do a lot in order to meet our climate targets. A way that we can start is by ensuring that we're educating all of our residents to the availability and the nutritiousness and the health impacts, right, of having a more climate-friendly diet. So that's one thing, and we're really committed to that. We're doing that through, promoting Meatless Mondays in schools, like at Department of Education and so on. But I also want to say that a big piece of this is New York City and many other urban cities across the United States are leading on climate action every day, whether we're talking about building emissions, whether we're talking about vehicles, right, and electric vehicle deployment, whether we're talking about food. And I think it's really important for us to really also recognize our place in that, right? Like food purchasing and food procurement by city agencies is such an important part of the equation, but it's not the only part of the equation. And so one place where I would love to see my office take a bigger role, and we will, is the way that during the PlantYC years, the first citywide sustainability plan, we launched the Carbon Challenge to encourage our institutional partners, universities, hospitals, Broadway, right? Like those big institutions to help us meet and to sign up for those goals of decreasing their greenhouse gas emissions on a timeline, the timeline that the city was setting for itself. So again, the city's leading by example. We're passing our executive orders. We are putting legislation in place. We're educating and promoting in our schools and other facilities. But we also want the private sector to meet us. And so I love the idea of these challenges and these pledges, because at the end, we don't need we don't need to pick a winner. We just need to encourage our institutional partners. Like, I want to shout out NYU is one of the Cool Food Pledge signatories, right? I think Mount Sinai, or one of our local hospitals, is also one of the signatories. We want to do more of that. I want to see more of our partners meet us where we are and ensure that they are increasing the proportion of and promoting the proportion of plant-based foods and climate-friendly foods in their own institutions. Again, it's millions of meals a day. And so I'm excited about that, as opposed to being focused on over-regulation. We can't regulate what you put on your table every day. We can't.
Yeah. Craig, if I may, I just want to put a fine point on something that Kizzy mentioned, which is that this is not about restrictions. And, you know, I've had the opportunity to be able to hear directly from Mayor Adams a number of times as we're considering different things. And he will always come back to, again, whether it's a personal story or something, you know, we all have stories that we remember about food, whether it was used as a reward or as a punishment or something. And just that food is personal to so many people, and how we use this privilege of being able to improve our food choices is something that we can't take lightly, and have to get right by giving increased information and access to knowledge and choices for people to make on their own.
Thank you. And to sort of expand on some of the points here in your responses, there's recently been a focus on elevating a plant-forward approach towards food in terms of how we might be able to address climate change. Do you think focusing on this sort of plant-forward, plant-based, there's a number of different ways that the term is used, or the sort of concept is used. Do you think that's a winning strategy? And I just want to highlight a question/comment from one of the participants in the chat, Lorraine. And Lorraine says, raising beef animals is a way for people to make money, to pay New York massive land taxes. Does the rural economy upstate New York mean anything to NYC? And Lorraine also says that, do dairy farmers get any credit for the vast open green lands, the carbon that's sequestered, the habitats, the watershed that they help protect, et cetera? And I'm wondering if anybody has a response to that.
I can certainly start. So I think I grew up on a farm in Ireland, actually. So I grew up on a beef farm. So I have some connection to farming and the farming lifestyle. And it's a tough life, you know. And I think the thing is that what we're learning is that the food system we've got is just sucking the life out of the earth. It's literally overwhelming the earth. We just don't have enough land for everyone to eat in the way that Europeans and North Americans do. And so it requires us to really pivot in our thinking in terms of what we can do with the land we've got. And also, you know, the climate emergency, the emissions from certain types of food has been proven to be far more intensive than others. So can we think about limiting some of the really climate impactful foods and increasing some of the less climate impactful foods? And I think, you know, the history of, of the last 100 years, meat consumption has increased significantly. You know, there's no reason why it can't shift again. And also, I think it takes brilliant legislation. It takes brilliant lawmakers to make this work. You know, we need to protect farmers. We need to support farmers. We need to incentivize the practice we want to see. And I think that's as true in the UK, where I am, as it is in the US. And it's really important for, you know, local and national government to think about how they're going to support farmers to transition into this new sustainable food future, and that can't leave those beef farmers behind. So just, I suppose I'd say I hear you and I empathize with that position. I think we've got to think outside the box now in terms of how we actually create a food system that's going to be robust and truly sustainable.
Thanks,
And just
Edwina.
to add
Joe,
to,
please, yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, just
No,
to
go.
add to what Edwina said, it's, of course, what she said was well said, but there are some economic and behavioral interventions we have to seriously consider. For instance, here in the United States, we subsidize a lot of greenhouse gas emitting industries. And even though we don't necessarily think about our energy extracting industries having an effect on our food system, they're directly implicated. And if we really want to see a manifestation of this behavioral change at a holistic level, while also making sure farmers, maybe ruminant farmers, for instance, are still solvable, well, or solving, I should say, we're going to have to do some economic engineering. We're going to have to truly reassess the subsidies that we're giving and then incentivize what we actually want to see. Now, of course, doing that is really tough. Maybe the city of New York can do that more effectively than the entire United States. But I think we're going to have to see at least regional level changes, the Midwest, the southern part of the United States, the western part of the United States make these shifts politically and through legislation.
Thank you, Joe. And Julia, I have a question that I want to direct to you, and this sort of piggybacks off of the last part of Joe's remarks. So climate action is a balance between public and private partnerships and between the government sector and the private sector. I'm wondering if you have a sense of who should take the lead. Should it be the public sector? Should it be the private sector? Should it be a mix? Is it situational? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's going to need to be a mix. I don't think that there's one silver bullet that is going to solve this issue. I don't think that it's one sector. I think we all have to work together. Now, you know, we are seeing lots of innovation and commitments around the private sector. So if they can, you know, drive that change, and then everybody kind of jumps on board, that's fantastic. But it's going to need to take all of us working together to solve this issue.
Any other thoughts from other panelists on this question? All right, then I'll jump into some of the audience questions again. And this is a question I think Kate or Kizzy, you might be best to answer. This is from Allie, and Allie says that they've heard about a Bay Area effort to get public institutions to divest from CAFOs and other intensive animal food production methods. Is this something that NYC has considered?
Kizzy, do you maybe want to speak about the other divestments?
Sure. So not specifically to CAFOs, I'm not aware of that effort here in the city, but we have led a campaign for the last few years about divesting from fossil fuel companies. You know, we were involved in a lawsuit and things like that, and are currently in the process of divesting little by little for our pension plan from companies that contribute to our climate crisis. And so there is some precedent there, but again, I'm not aware of one that is specifically focused on
I'll just share that we have a great shared colleague who is now, I believe, head of climate at the comptroller's office. Mm-hmm. So that is a new position, and I think again just shows sort of the whole of government approach here towards addressing climate. And I'm not aware of anything either, but you know, we'll stay close to it.
Great, thank you. This is another question from Mohammed. And Mohammed asks, in relation to inflation, recession, and global food insecurity, what challenges do you see in corporate and government responsibility to protect public health while mitigating climate deterioration, such as efforts from corporations or governments to subsidize healthier choices? So what are the sorts of positive engagements that you've seen or you think can happen in terms of encouraging changes in behavior around climate-friendly food practices?
Well, I can start off from an academic perspective. Quite frankly, since year 2020 and George Floyd, I've seen a strong shift in an emphasis on national security, food systems, as well as racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic equity, not only within what journals want to see published, but also within the granting agencies. They're strongly encouraging community engagement, community co-development, transdisciplinary collaborations like the one we see here on this panel between governments and academics and industry. So I can say that there is at least a shift in trying to manage this. I don't know if we're at the point, at least in the academic world, of having a universal framework or an approach to addressing this, but I can say there are a lot of smart people and ambitious and well-to-do people trying.
Is that a question anyone else wants to? Go ahead, Edwina.
I think somebody else was going to speak, actually, was it?
I'll just go real fast, Edwina. I was going to say, we're seeing this a lot in our industry as well. So we do have clients that are subsidizing the better for you choice, which is typically the healthier for the climate choice as well.
And I think I was just going to say something quite similar, which is we've got our playbook for 23 best bet interventions, which is a list of tactics that do help to nudge and move the needle. There was a point made earlier just around choice and availability, and I think it's interesting because I think we don't want to limit choice, but there's loads of research that suggests if you change the availability, so if you change the ratio of things, or if you change the language, you change the presentation, it's amazing. I think we imagine that we're very sophisticated when it comes to our food choices, but actually there are some really simple things that any organization serving food can do that can actually just have an impact on that decision-making process. And actually nudge people towards choosing more climate-friendly food, whether they even recognize they're doing it or not. So if you put your vegetarian options in between all your meat options, then you've got meat eaters who see this. If you stick it in the vegetarian box, they're going to just ignore it and they go, that's not for me. So, there's some really great and easy things that any institution serving food can do. But I'm conscious that the question might have been a bigger, more kind of systems issue, but just from a tactical point of view, there's some of the things that can be really useful.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Edwina, those are exactly the strategies that we are talking to agencies about very often right now, certainly from the Department of Education, and certainly with inputs from nonprofits and others as well. Little things like renaming a menu item. As a parent of 2 kids, that goes far when you read something and it actually appeals to you. And I will say also that we are watching that space very closely around, in other forms of incentives. And so between the nudges, the different menuing, the different product placements and availability, all in an effort to help, guide decisions that help people make the healthier and climate-friendly choice.
Thank you, Kate. This has been a really great conversation, very enlightening, and it's been inspiring to hear of the work that everyone is involved in. I hope those of you in the audience found this very enlightening and engaging as well. A conversation that we are likely to be having for some time into the future. I want to thank all of our panelists again for your time and effort in participating in this forum, and add one last reminder for our forum on May 31st, looking at predatory marketing issues. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you again, everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.